everybody around the country. We are sitting down as you are enjoying this morning's podcast from Step Outside Fishing Podcast this morning with the one and only Justin Willmer from Tackle Tactics. Good morning to you, Justin.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. Thanks for your time today. It's a pleasure to have you on board with us this evening. And I'll tell you what, mate, it's a very interesting topic that we have on hand at the moment as well.
Yeah, the humble flathead.
It is a humble fish because it's one of the bread and butter species that a lot of people target around the country, generally being your flathead, whiting, and of course brim. And there are so many different varieties and species of this particular fish that you don't have to be an expert to go out and catch it, because you can catch one off the bank on a hand line, and of course you can get them off the boats if you want to get out there and get amongst it as well.
Yeah, definitely been a favourite species for me throughout my life, kicking off fishing for them early on with my dad and that sort of thing, in the old timber boat with the baits out and that sort of thing. But like you say, an accessible species, and even, you know, the kid with the basic gear off the jetty or something is a chance of catching a trophy fish, which is excellent.
Mate, now you're from Tackle Tactics, which is home of Z-Man lures, platypus line. I mean, realistically, you've got some of the best lures at your beck and call. Mate, when you grew up, would you have ever thought that soft plastics would evolve to where they are today?
No, it's unbelievable. Now, the wall of a tackle shop now compared to when I was a kid is just crazy. You know, when we first started off fishing, it was all bait. So for me, it would have been a 2-gang rig with a half a pilly, or a 3 or 4-gang rig with a whole pilly for a flathead. And then the very basics of soft plastic started to arrive from the US. Yeah. And, you know, you had limited models and limited colours to choose from, and you're probably throwing a lizard or whatever you could get in terms of a soft plastic. And nowadays it's every colour and every style imaginable out there, that's for sure.
I was talking to a good friend of mine, Dominic Janua, he was the head of marketing for BIA Australia, and he was asking about Flathead, and he said soft plastics, you know, and we're talking, you know, a different generation of people, because not only just for children, but also for people, adults wanting to get involved in fishing, such as Dom, wanting to know the simplicities of targeting flathead. And of course, when you do walk into a tackle shop, of course, you know, an anaconda, is that you look at this tackle wall and it can be quite daunting because it is such a big array of lures in front of you. Mate, tell me, as a kid growing up, what was the interesting facts of a flathead that brought you to being a flathead fisherman?
Yeah, I guess for me, just purely that accessibility factor, and also the fact that they love eating lures. Like flathead are an ambush predator hiding in the mud or the sand, and they're just waiting for a meal to go past. So if you bounce a lure past them in the right place, there's a fair chance that they're going to get out and have a crack at it. And so now for those getting into it, you know, starting off with what are the fish eating? They're eating little bait fish. So if you get a paddle tail plastic or a small bait fish imitation soft plastic, you're a pretty good chance of catching a flathead for sure.
Mate, it comes down to, you just hit a couple of key words there for me, and that is locating what the fish are eating, because every bank or every area in Australia has a different variety of species. Some fish may have, you know, there could be herring in an area, there could be a fish species of a scad. You want to really try and get that local breakdown, don't you? You don't want to use something that's a little bit foreign. That may work in another area, but it won't work in another. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is pretty amazing, that good old saying, find the bait, find the fish. And I'll often be out, I'll take out my wife or my dad, and we'll be out fishing for flathead, and you're working a bank, and it just doesn't feel right. It gut feel after time on the water. It just feels like a desert. There's no bait flicking, there's no movement. And then you move to another bank where there's bait flicking around and bait movement, and you'll start to catch fish straight away. And it's a good idea to try and look in the water and see what is the bait that's flicking, how big is that bait, you know, what colour is that bait? And they call it matching the hatch, I guess is the old saying. So you're trying to match that soft plastic to the bait that's in the water. And, yeah, I guess for years, you know, the plastics have got more and more realistic in colour. So I normally tell people to carry 3 colours with them is my general trick.
3 colours?
Yeah, 3. That's my theory, is the 3 colour theory. So first of all, we find a spot where there's some bait. So we know there's some bait there. We try and match the hatch. So we'll try and get that colour that's very similar. But if not, we're going to change things up. So when the water's really clear and it's a bright day, I generally tell them to fish a really natural light sort of colour, very clear, translucent-y, sort of plastic.
Yep.
If the water's dirty, which can often happen when the tide turns to run out, or if we've had rain, if the water's dirty, you want to go for a darker, more silhouette colour, like a gold rush, which is a black with a gold belly.
Yep.
So where that dark silhouette colour will stand out much better in the water and help the flathead to find the lure. And then if all else fails, throw your hands in the air and put on a fluoro colour. And those, it's amazing how the pink glows or the electric chickens or those out there colours that don't look like anything can get the bites on those other days. So I say to people, if you're going to go and chase flathead on soft plastic, try and have a nice natural light colour, a darker dirty water type colour, and then that fluoro in case they're not eating. And you're a fair chance that you could catch fish.
Mate, they call the Elton John colour, obviously, with all the pinks and yellows and greens and blues, nuclear chicken, all these different colours. That's correct. So generally something you'd think, I'm not entirely sure, but I know another species, which is your snapper, love that nuclear chicken as well when you drop down those larger plastics to them. Mate, when you are targeting flathead, what sort of a bank do you want to find, whether you're in a boat or off the land? What sort of bank are you looking for a flathead lie?
Yeah, I think. Well, that's an interesting one too. You say the flathead lie. That's a good cheat for people. If you're going to fish an area, go and wander around at low tide and see if you can find those flathead lies, those depressions in the sand or the mud that flathead leave behind from the previous high tide. And that's often a sign that there's been fish in the area, and hopefully they're still there. But for me, it's structure is key. Almost whatever species you're targeting, other than say some of the pelagics that move around chasing the bait. Often the structure is key, and the biggest mistake I see people make with flathead fishing is they go, oh, flathead loves sandbanks, I'm going to go drift along this massive sandbank. You're a chance of finding a fish, but realistically, structure holds and structure attracts fish. So even when I'm targeting flathead, I'm still looking for structure. So on the higher stages of the tide, I might be looking around mangrove edges and that sort of thing. And that's why I guess so many get caught around the boat ramp and jetties and those sorts of things, because that's where the bait is, that's where the structure is. So for me on high tide, I'm up there on the weed beds, looking for pockets in the weed, and I'm also looking along the mangrove edges. But definitely the most effective time to target flathead is those last couple of hours of the run-out tide and the first of the run-in tide, and that's because there's less water to be in, and also that current's dropping out and concentrating the bait and the fish on the edge of channel edges and drop-offs. So if you can find rocks or rubble, lay down timber, mangrove edges, weed beds, weed is one of the most effective places to target flathead. And if you can be throwing your plastic up right onto the edge of the weed and just hopping your plastic along and out from those weed edges, you're definitely a chance of a good sized fish holding on those edges. And
like you say, if you can find the flathead lies by doing a bit of fishing forensics, we'll call it, and that is going down there looking for that coffin-shaped impression in the sand or in the gravel or mud, that's a sure sign that there's flathead in that area as well. And you mentioned obviously the drop of the tide. So I guess time of the day, mate, does that make a big difference? Like early morning before it gets busy on the water to disrupt the fish, or it doesn't really matter as long as you've got that tide throughout the day?
Yeah, flathead are probably one of those species where it impacts them less, I guess, because they are holding on the bottom. So even if you drift over them or drive over them in a boat, a lot of time they'll stay there. And whereas your brim or your species that are just holding free in the water column, a lot of them will dart off and disappear. But you're spot on. It's still those peak bite times of morning and afternoon. So if you can time your tide around that morning or the afternoon, you're definitely more chance of catching numbers, especially, and potentially bigger fish. Yep. But flathead, for those that like a sleep-in, flathead's still a fish that you can catch right throughout the day. But if you target those key times of the tide, so a lot of the guys that fish the Flathead Classic on the Gold Coast and that sort of thing, where a lot of flathead get caught. It's amazing how many get caught around that last 2 hours of the run out, first hour of the run in. And then people kind of just, where are the fish? How do we find these fish, And the guys that can nut them out on those other stages of the tide are the guys that win the comp often and do well in the comp. But that if you wanted to have a go at chasing flathead, then that would be your prime time. Those last 2 hours have run out, first hour have run in. And basically it just means, all that water that sits up on the flat and all that bait that's sitting up there has to go somewhere. So as that tide drops out, the flathead just lay on the edge of that drop-off and they wait for that bait to be forced off the flat. It's got nowhere to go. So as it comes off that flat on the last of the dropping tide, they feed up on it. So they're very active at that stage of the tide as well.
You can visually see what you're saying. If you can think about the flats in a bay or a creek or canal entrance, anything like that. As it drains out, you can visually see, the water dropping. You got those little turbulent eddies and corners where obviously the bait fish get pulled into, or on those drop-offs, and your flathead lie there. So that's exactly what people out there listening to this, wanting to target flathead, need to find. If you locate that, you're halfway there to catching a flatty. But of course it also comes down to other noticeable things in the environment. The black shags that we see out there with the pelicans at times there, Justin, where that you'll see 50 birds in one and they're all diving down eating the jelly prawns or the bait fish and all that. Does that bring the flathead in as well? Like, are the flathead also patrolling that area, wanting to target? Just for people out there, if they see this, they go, I'm going to go and fish that. Well, there's a chance of catching a bird, I guess.
Yeah, and we've both done that. So fun and games. Yeah, I was connected to a giant hawk on tip of Fraser Island throwing slugs for tuna, and
oh no,
everything ended well. But yeah, you're spot on again. If there's bait in the area, there's flathead aren't the only thing that want to eat the bait. So there'll be birds in the area, and I know another mate that chases barramundi, and he says the same thing. If he's working the impoundment and there's birds working an area, means there's bait in the area, and so there's likely fish in the area as well. So yeah, those flathead will definitely be around where that active area is, and it's amazing in the system. You might only need to go 50 metres to find a bank that's the current might be different or something, and it's holding bait. So if if you don't change anything, then the result doesn't change potentially. So if you're not catching fish, try a different bank, move on. And a good point you also said was the water movement.
Yes.
Water movement is often crucial for a flathead as well. So if I'm fishing a creek, I might look at the banks where the water is pushing onto that bank, or where it's creating an eddy, or you can often see where there's structure because of the water movement. Yeah. Even if you don't have a sounder on your kayak or you don't have a sounder on the boat, those eddies and that water movement is often a giveaway of structure or changes in the bottom, which will also hold those fish. And probably the number one place to target a flathead for me has always been the drains on the flats. And I call them bait funnels, because if you've got a whole big expanse of weed or mud flat that's draining on the dropping tide, the last place where the bait can hold before they come out into the mouths of the flathead is those drains. So if you fish around, if you're fishing along a bank in your kayak, or you're walking along a bank, or you're in the boat and you're fishing the edges of those flats and you come to a drain, definitely spend a bit more time fishing around that drain, because it's likely that there'll be flathead holding in the mouth of that drain, waiting for the last of that bait to come off the flat.
Mate, another key secret to people out there who are bank bound, don't have a boat, and generally if you're walking flats where there's a channel drop off, and particularly at high tide, because throughout the day a lot of the bigger flathead in particular come up onto those shallows. It could be only a foot of water and you'll get a crocodile in that area, being a bigger flathead to those out there who don't know. But I've noticed where the stingrays are, when the stingrays are trying to sift up the yabbies, they leave that smoke trail of dust and sand, stirred up clouded water behind them, filtering either with the wind or with the current. But I have noticed casting in behind the stingray into those shallows also produces flathead, because they're in there trying to, they're hiding to ambush the whiting that come up onto those flats, and also target the yabbies that the stingrays are missing. So it is that food chain. Have you ever done that?
Yes, spot on. And we actually do it a bit locally. I'm giving away
some of your secrets here, Justin.
Yeah, but we actually, no, you're spot on, because we do it a little bit as well behind the dugong.
Yeah, right, okay.
In our local system. So the dugong will be moving along, feeding on the weed.
Yep.
And the same thing, they're feeding on the weed, and you can see a distinct brown trail behind them as they stir up the bottom.
Yeah.
So if you're following those stingrays, if you see, and you might just be drifting the flat, but if you see those stingrays, or you see the dugong,
Yep.
it's definitely worth a cast in those trail. And they often say where the stingrays are is good area for whiting and that sort of thing. So
Yep.
yeah, where the stingrays are, you'll often find the whiting, you'll find the brim, you'll find the flathead, trevally. All sorts of species will follow and take advantage of the stingrays and the dugong and stuff stirring up the bottom.
So in that sort of situation, what coloured Z-Man would you run, mate?
Yeah, I've likely probably already got on a motor oil or a midnight oil on one rod.
Yep.
And it's funny, that UV reactive quality of the motor oil and the midnight oil colour, it definitely makes it stand out in the water, and it's a good dirty water, clean water, any water condition sort of colour. So I often find myself putting on the motor oil or the midnight oil, and that's a great starting point for people.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'd have a dirty watercolour on, like a gold rush,
Yep.
like a goldy type colour and that sort of thing. But yeah, generally when I head out to fish, I've normally got even if I'm in the kayak, I've probably got 3 rods. In the boat, I've probably got 10 combos ready to go.
Wow. Yeah, the gold rush is it's that black and gold fleck sort of a style of lure, and obviously you can also have like your pearls and new pennies and all that sort of stuff as if you wanted to, like you said, to go that different variety to suit the different clarity of the water. Mate, we've located the fish. We've worked out, okay, this is where you need to be. This is where you need to go. But what sort of gear do you need to use? Give me an ideal outfit. Whether you're, we'll start with a spinning combo. What is it someone want? 1 kilo, 4 kilo, 8 kilo, 10 kilo? Give us an idea.
Yeah, so I will generally, in the boat when I'm out just fishing general estuary, I'll probably have 3 different weight combos in amongst the combos that I've got. So even if I'm in the kayak with 3 combos, I'll have a 1 to 3 rod, 1 to 3 kilo rod, with a 20, 30 size reel, and it'll be spooled up with 6 or 8 pound braid, and I'll still probably fish 10 pound leader. So depending on the area you're in and the clarity of the water, some guys might drop their leaders down to 8, 6, 4, even 2 pound for brim and stuff. But when I'm chasing flathead, I'll probably fish 10 pound leader, even on that 1 to 3 kilo combo. And that light combo I'll use for casting the Ned rig. So the Ned rig is a mushroom-shaped jig head with, like, I'll put a TRD crawls or a small finesse type plastic on there, and I'll use that for picking the sandy pockets on the flats. So people are amazed often that you say, well, I was fishing 40 centimetres, 50 centimetres of water and catching flathead. But with that lightweight combo, even if you find a patch of sand in amongst the weed up on the flats that might be the size of a car, you can make a cast to one side of that pocket and you can just shake and roll and hop that plastic through that little sand patch and cover plenty of ground. And I recently got an 80 centimetre flathead out of the yak out of about 60 centimetres of water up on those flats, picking those. I call it picking the pockets, and so that light rod with light finesse plastics, a 1/10 ounce Nedlock's, TT Lures Nedlock's head, which makes the plastic stand up because the Z-Man's buoyant, and you put a little 2.5 inch TRD crawls on there. It's like a little yabby or crab representation, and just shake it through those patches.
Yep.
Very effective. Probably 99% of my, well, not 99, 90% of my flathead fishing is a 2 to 4 kilo spin rod, 7 foot spin rod with a 20 or 30 size reel, 10 pound braid, 10 pound leader.
Yep.
And that's a good sort of all round rod for throwing a jig head from 1/8 ounce through to about 1/4 ounce generally. And that covers a lot of your flats fishing and your shallow sort of drop offs.
Yeah.
And then I've normally got a 3 to 6 kilo rod, and that 3 to 6 kilo rod is loaded with 10 pound braid, 10 pound leader or 15 pound leader on a 30 size reel with 10 pound braid. And that's my deeper edge flathead stuff, where I'm normally fishing a 1/4 ounce to a 3/8 ounce jig head, fishing down to say 3 or 4 meters. And that's a good use the 3 to 6 kilo rod. If you come across a snapper or a dewey or something like that, you're still you're still in the fight. And if you got 15 pound leader, you're still a good chance. But 10, often you'll run 10 pound anyway.
Mate, one thing I've noticed is if we're running jig head, say you're running a 3/8 ounce or or maybe a 1/8, depending on obviously the weight of it. But the heavier the jig head, the lighter the rod. Like you said earlier, if you're fishing a flat and the gut feeling is it feels barren, If you've got the wrong size jig head to suit the outfit you're running, it's going to be harder to sink that hook into the fish's mouth because the rod becomes too soft. So, and that's one thing I've noticed, if you feel the hook, you feel the hit of the fish onto the lure, but if it's only a 1 to 3 kilo outfit, when you go to lay into it, if he hasn't really engulfed it and he's just sort of grabbing it, it's really hard to actually get that fish hooked up. Whereas if you have that sort of 3 to 5 kilo sort of outfit, or 3 to 6 kilo, is that you've got a little bit more punch in the rod, sturdiness one would say, to actually give it that flick back and actually sink the hook into the fish's mouth. Have you noticed anything like that?
Yeah, and I guess it depends on where you're fishing a lot as well.
Right.
Like the for the Gold Coast Anglers Flathead Classic, there's a lot of big fish down there. So those guys are potentially even fishing heavier rods again. Yeah. Their jig heads could be up around 5/8, 3/4, even 1 ounce in that real deep water stuff.
Yep.
But for the average punter, that 2 to 4 kilo or 3 to 6 kilo rod is definitely the go-to. It allows you to punch a long cast, cover plenty of water. Yep. It allows you to set that hook nicely when you feel the bite. And like you say with a flathead as well too, a lot of the time, if you're hopping the lure up off the bottom and a flathead eats it, all you feel is a tap.
Yes.
And then you've got to set that hook and either wind up and set the hook or just set the hook. And so that 3 to 6 gives you that purchase to penetrate that fish's mouth and set that hook. And also a lot of guys will fish a lighter wire jig head when they're targeting brim, flathead, those estuary type species. Mm-hmm. So that thinner hook gauge also improves the hook set as well. So for me, I often fish a TT Lures Demons or a TT Lures Headlocks Finesse.
Okay.
And they're a fine wire hook. So the downside is you've got a lighter gauge hook, so you can't put as much hurt on the fish, but the penetration is much better. Otherwise, if you're just getting into your flathead fishing, it's hard to go past something like a Headlocks HD, it's a brutally strong hook.
Yep.
It's still black nickel chemically sharpened hook, so it's still going to pin the fish. But if you do hook a snapper or whatever, you know the hook is going to stand up if you do have heavier drag settings and that sort of thing.
Now, mate, when we're talking the plastics to go into, say, the headlocks in the finesse, mate, are you running more like the say the jerk shads, or are you going for the grub tail, or of course the minnow? What sort of tail on your plastic do you prefer to catch the flathead with? I guess it depends possibly on the retrieve or the depth of water. I mean, what is it you think?
Yeah, I think if you put half a dozen hardcore flathead anglers together and said, what's the best flathead plastic, they'd probably punch on. But it's for me, I love paddle tails, and predominantly because I fish a lot of, I would say, shallower water, so 0.5 metre through to maybe 4 metres.
Yep.
And the areas that I fish, there's a lot of bait fish, so whiting, mullet, those sorts of things. So my go-tos will be a paddle tail style of plastic.
Yep. While
some anglers prefer a curl tail, which is great, they both work really well. And then some anglers that fish, especially, I don't know, the jerk shad style of plastic, I've caught some great flathead on it, and it's a very versatile plastic. It casts a long way because it doesn't have a lot of action in the tail. And then you can apply the action with the tip of the rod, giving it hops and flicks and that sort of thing. And the guys will fish it on a really light jig head up in the shallows, right down to deep water fishing. And that jerk bait, jerk shad style of plastic is a classic style of plastic. And a lot of guys do well on it in the flathead classic as well. And yeah, for me, it's paddle tails. If I was saying to someone that just hadn't fished plastics before and they wanted to catch a flathead, I would say go with a paddle tail or a curl tail plastic, because it's got a lot of action already built into the plastic. So when you cast that lure out there, it'll sink down and the tail will actually work as it sinks. Every time you move the plastic, the tail will work. And even if there's current flow, the tail will probably be working as well. And the Z-Man, which is one of the brands that we do, 10 times tough plastic. So it's a very soft and stretchy plastic and very durable. Yes. But it's also naturally buoyant, which a lot of people don't realise. So when your jig head's sitting on the bottom, the plastic will actually stand up off the bottom and look very natural.
Right.
So if you're using those little crayfish imitations and things, they stand claws up, like they're trying to defend themselves. So when you move it away, they look like they're fleeing, and then they stand up with their claws up and attract the fish to them. Yep. And same with the paddle tail. The paddle tail, for me, will hop along, or swim along, and then when you stop, it stands tail up and it looks like it's feeding in the bottom,
Yes.
and it just sways with the water movement. So a lot of the times, my wife will ring me. I put the rod between my legs. I'm talking to my wife. Yep, and then off it goes because the lure's just bouncing along with the current with the tail up, and it just looks like it's feeding and swimming along.
Yes.
And the flathead goes, all right, here we go. Here's the meal. Bang, just nails it.
So in your curl tails, you'd be looking at a couple of lures for your tackle pack. Would be your midnight oil, your bad shad, probably something like your coconut ice glade, just to give that little bit of random colour. And also probably a pearl. Those 4 different colours there are going from one extreme to another. And I guess that's and you do say about that curl tails is that the tail, they do stretch. It does stretch, and it has its own action, the unique action. But if a flathead grabs the bait, sometimes they can be very temperamental and they sook. If it grabs the tail but doesn't feel the hook, okay, you can recast into that area and he'll most likely come back again. But if the flathead, you hook him momentarily and you know he's on the hook and then you drop him, there's a good chance he's just going to sit there and sulk and not bite again. Would that be right?
Yeah, they are one of those species, and if we say, like, a lot of the time, if you have a good fish or something and you hit, like you say, you hit it, it feels the hook, it shakes the lure or something, and you go, I pinned it, or it felt the hook or whatever, and then generally, like you say, it won't come back. Whereas if you're getting short strikes, which does happen sometimes, you'll feel them grabbing the tail, and you'll have weight, and then it'll just come free. You'll have weight, it'll come free. So for me, I always scent up my plastics, and often if it gets quiet or you're getting those short sort of hits, I'll go, time to put on a little bit more scent. And I just put on a tiny dab of ProCure either side of the head of the plastic, and I slide it right down to the tip of its tail. And it's amazing how many times you put scent on, and boom, you get action again. So yeah, definitely cast. If you're getting those short strikes, try scenting up. Try casting back into the same area. If you've got the second rod there with a different plastic on, try showing them a different plastic can also help. And also mix up your retrieve. So there's 3 main retrieves that I'll run for a flathead. So I'll generally slow roll, which is just a slow wind. So for me, you can sort of, if you're not sure how deep it is, you can cast out, count your lure down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and it's on the bottom. So the next time I cast out, I might count to 5 and then start a slow wind. And that way I know I'm just above the bottom. So I'm just above the flathead, especially if it's weedy. Otherwise, if it's sandy bottom, you can just drag it a bit on the bottom. And that slow wind will often produce fish. Sometimes they want that slow roll.
Okay. No movement of the rod tip there, sorry, Justin?
No. What I'll do, if I'm fishing paddle tail or curl tail, there's plenty of action in the plastic. And all I'll do is maybe slow down or speed up a little bit, just change the speed of the retrieve, especially over the top of patchy weed. And then every now and then you might pause it, tap the bottom, get it up again, and then slow roll. Otherwise, the old classic burn and kill, which is great, especially for kids, if you're getting kids into soft plastics fishing for flathead. So a burn and kill is basically a big long cast, and then the burn is the winding of the reel. So you might do 3 winds, and you might vary the speed of that burn and vary the kill, which is the pause. So basically it's wind, 1, 2, 3. So it can drive you nuts when you're teaching kids and you've got them saying wind, 1, 2, 3. Wind, 1, 2, 3. So after a little while you say, say it in your head. You can see their mouth still moving. But then it's amazing. I fished with a mate up in Townsville and we took the kids out using that technique. And they caught a dozen flathead, and it was excellent. Just with that winding and pausing. The winding kicks it up off the bottom. The pause sends it back down again. Get that puff of mud or sand. Winding again. Otherwise, a lot of people just fish that classic hopping retrieve as well, which is punching that plastic out, and they'll give it 2 or 3 hops with the rod tip, and then wind up the slack as they're allowing the plastic to fall freely. And just that hop, and then wind and pause and allow it to hit the bottom again. And with the flatties, you've got to be ready, like you were saying before, when you're getting those short strikes and stuff. You've got to be ready for that tap as they'll eat it on the drop, and then that's when you wind up and set that hook solid on that fish.
Yeah, generally it'll feel like a snag, won't it? Like you feel that knock. You go if you're doing the hopping, you're going like, and it all comes down to the wrist. Like your wrist motion, your wrist might move say, 2 or 3 centimetres tops.
Yep.
But that emulates 2 or 3 inches off the tip of the rod, or even a little bit more. So it's all in that wrist moment. And if you feel that tap and that knock, and you think, and then it's that motion that comes second nature, that you wind the slack up on the reel, and as you wind down, you're pulling back to strike. And that's something that people have to get used to, because that's sinking the hook into the fish. I mean, that's going to create that connection that you need to have solidly at the end, particularly if it's a good fish.
Yeah, and someone once said to me, strikes are free.
Yeah.
Strikes are free. So if you think a fish is eaten, or you feel like you got to bite, whack them. Because it doesn't cost you anything. No. And I've been out with mates before and watched them, and I said, you just got to hit. They're like, what? I said, I just saw your rod tip. You just got to bite. And then they start to pay more attention to their rod tip and the tension on their line, and then boom, you'll see them get it. And they're like, yeah, I had that before. Yep, you did, and boom, there you got a nice flatty. So it's just, time on the water is everything. But the great thing about flathead is it's not like some of those species where you throw 1,000 casts to get one hit. No. So if you go out and you work those likely-looking areas, you might miss this one, but you'll get another chance. So just keep plugging along that bank or whatever. And for me, some guys like to fish really slow. They'll fish 1/8 heads and that sort of thing. But for me, I generally fish for active fish. So I'll often fish heavier than a lot of people, and I'll fish fast. And I'm looking for fish that are feeding. They're the ones I want to catch. So if the conditions are tough, you might have to drop down to a 1/8 or a 1/6 or a smaller jig head. Mm-hmm. But if you're going out there for the first time, just have a go at flathead, or you haven't caught one yet, but you've been trying, a 1/4 ounce is a great starting point. Even if I'm in a metre of water, I'll have a 1/4 ounce head on. It'll allow me to cast further away from the boat or further away from the bank, so I'm not spooking the fish. And it'll allow me to get to the bottom quicker where the fish are and use a few different retrieves, do more casts, try more retrieves, and cover more area. So, 1/4 ounce and then 3/8 ounce for deeper edges and stuff for me.
But if you're running a 5-inch lure, okay, say it's the streaks, the curl tails. If you're running a 5-inch lure, what size? And you're running say a 3/8 or a 1/4 ounce. What size hook should you be running? 1/0, a 1, 5/0? What size hook would you put in that plastic?
Yeah, it does depend a little on the area and the fish, but flathead are one of those cool things where when you're in that size of plastic, it doesn't work right through the whole range of gamut of sizes of plastic. Mm-hmm. But a 3-inch, I'll generally run a 3/0. A 4-inch, I'll run a 4/0. A 5-inch, I'll run a 5/0. Is a good starting point. Okay. In saying that, when I fish a 2.5-inch, I fish a 1/0. So it throws a spanner in things. But for me, my go-tos for flathead would be a 2.5-inch grubs or a 2.5-inch slim swims from Z-Man with a 1/4 ounce 1/0. Yep. And then from there, I would step to probably what I think is the best all-rounder for a flathead, which is a 1/4 ounce 3/0 with a 3-inch minnows. And that is basically the perfect little potty mullet or whiting. And the 1/4 ounce is a great weight for the shallows where we often target them. Yep. From there, I would step up to a 4-inch centre jerk shad or a 5-inch centre jerk shad, or the 4-inch streaks curly tail or 5-inch streaks curly tail. And that would be for deeper water edges and that sort of thing. And in saying that, it depends on region, because as you move south into New South Wales and that sort of thing, those guys get a lot of big flathead in areas with little water movement and that sort of thing. And so, or the opposite, heavy water movement at creek mouths and things. So they'll often fish bigger plastics because there's a lot more bigger fish in the area.
Yes.
But for the person starting out, a 3-inch will get eaten by a small one, and a 3-inch will get eaten by a big one. So a 3-inch is a great starting point, whereas down south they're starting to fish bigger and bigger plastics for those big fish in those areas with little water movement. Yep. And then as you move into south further and the flathead change a bit and that sort of thing, they're often fishing, like say Port Phillip Bay, deeper water, where they might fish. There's a lot of smaller flathead, but they still get big ones, and they'll fish 3/8 ounce a lot of the time with a 4-inch streaks curly tails out in the deep stuff, and then similar to us in the shallows, and same down in south, or similar in the shallows, maybe downsize the plastic a little. But yeah, it's a great fish, and it's available right around the country. So paddle tail or curl tail, great starting point. Yeah, and then as you get more experience, bring on those jerk shads and the crustaceans and all those sorts of things.
Mate, if you were heading out there today and you had one go-to lure, okay, someone out there is going, right, I just want to buy one lure. What is your go-to lure?
Yeah, for me, it's a battle now between that 2.5-inch slim swims and the 3-inch minnows. Mainly because the 2.5-inch slim swims will also catch you a lot of brim and all sorts of other species. But if you were going out, I want to catch a flathead, I would go a 1/4-ounce 3 jig head with a 3-inch minnows. And in terms of colour choice, it's hard to go past a motor oil or a midnight oil as a good all-rounder. But like you say, pearl is a very, 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 very popular colour and probably an underrated colour in some areas. And primarily that's because the pearl takes on the colour of the water, takes on the tint of the water.
Yep.
So bait fish don't want to be eaten. They want to blend in with that water. And that's what pearl does. If the water's greeny, the plastic looks green. If the water's brown, the plastic takes on that brown tint. So pearl is a very, very good starting point as well.
Well, there you have it, everybody. We've had Justin Willmer on board with us this morning from Tackle Tactics, and the go-to lure for you out there if you're getting into flathead is going to be the 2.5-inch. It's the Slim Swim. Okay, well, no, we'll go the 3-inch minnow. Let's change it up there. Let's go the 3-inch minnow with a 1/4 ounce and a 3/0 hook midnight oil. And why not spend a little bit more and grab yourself a pearl colour as well. Hey, Justin, thanks for your time this morning, mate. You're a wealth of knowledge. What are you doing today, mate? Are you fishing today?
I've got a mow, as we do, and then probably sneak out for a flathead this afternoon.
Mate, you got to do the home duties first, don't you, before you can get out there and enjoy what the weekend has to offer. Hey, everybody, thanks very much for listening to the Step Outside Fishing Podcast. It's great to have you on board again. And Justin, mate, we're going to have you back because what's another topic that you think Australians would love to hear? We've also got a listener over in Norway. What can we appease for her or him?
Norway. Maybe we can get over there for a fish.
Do you reckon they have flathead?
Yeah, something similar probably.
No doubt. Thanks for your time there, Justin. And grab yourself some all the gear from, of course, Tackle Tactics there, Z-Mans, TT Lures. I mean, the list goes on. And spool up your lines with all the Platypus gears. We'll see you next week there, Australia. Thanks for watching and listening to the Step Outside Podcast.